Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Red Hour, a show I do twice a week where I throw a little chaos into Star Trek and review a random episode. Today's episode is Deep Space Nine, Season 1, in Episode 20, In the Hands of the Prophets. And it starts off with Keiko is teaching a class about the wormhole and how Cisco and Dax had discovered it, and that it's the first stable wormhole ever discovered. And at that time, Vedic Wynn, because she's not Kai at this moment, Vedic Wynn walks in, and Keiko stops and looks at her, and Wynn says, go ahead and don't mind me, go ahead and keep talking. So she talks about how it's a natural phenomenon, and different aspects of the wormhole. And then Wynn interrupts and says that, don't you mean it's the prophets that guide you safely through the wormhole? And she says, no, that's not what I believe, and I'm trying to talk about the scientific nature of the wormhole. And so they argue over that, and that's the end of that's the teaser. So you get the credits and the theme. So meanwhile, Chief is working on something on the station and has a Bajoran assistant with him, and she's already sort of fixed the problem, whatever he was supposed to fix, and he's kind of impressed with her. And but then he is looking for a specific tool. I forget what he called it, but it has to do with the security system, and the tool is missing. And it's not like him to, lose a tool. So then in Cisco's office, Keiko is talking to Cisco about the situation, and how, how Vedic Wynn had interrupted. And Cisco's saying that, well, he thinks that there's room for both philosophies on the station and in the classroom. And he brings in Kira for her perspective, and she says that she agrees with Wynn, and she likes Vedic Wynn, and she thinks that maybe there should be two separate classrooms, one for Bajoran students and one for Federation. And so that is sort of the discussion that's going on. And Cisco says that we have to live on this station together, basically. He doesn't want to split up the classrooms and stuff like that. So then he goes to visit Wynn on the station, and she's doing some sort of religious thing. And this is the first time that Cisco and Wynn have met. So if you've seen the show, there's a lot of, there's a lot of back and forth between these two. So this is like an epic meeting of sorts. Now, we didn't know that at the time. I don't know. I don't remember if this is the first time she's been on this show. And she's played by Louise Fletcher, who was Nurse Ratchet on in the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So with Jack Nicholson, and there's a couple other people in there. A couple other famous actors, and I can't remember who else is in there, but and I haven't seen it in a long time. probably about 20 years. Anyway, they she calls him emissary, and he's not comfortable with that, and he's not comfortable being, you know, being the emissary to for the prophet of the prophets or for the prophets, and she, touches his ear, and that's how they read their pa, which is like their version of the soul, and so they she even says something. She throws like a veiled threat towards Keiko that if Keiko doesn't agree to like what she's wanting, that something could happen to her. She doesn't say it exactly though that way, but you get the gist. So Chief is still looking for his tool, and he, he finds. So what they discover is that an ensign at like 4 o'clock in the morning had taken the tool to some section of the station and had reported something, and I guess was going to go use that tool to fix the situation. When they get there, they find it, and it's like this melted piece of metal, and they scan it and find that there's like organic material mixed in, and they take it to Bashir, and Bashir confirms that the remains were human. So that's what happened to the ensign. I forget his name. I have it written down somewhere. So then later on that day, Keiko and Chief O'Brien are walking on the promenade, and they go to this Bajoran vendor, and he refuses to sell like whatever they are there to get. He refuses to sell to him, and says it's his right. And at the same time, and so it's not like a racist thing; it's more a religion thing, So, and Miles kind of starts to get rough with him, and Keiko tells him to knock it off, and then Odo shows up and basically breaks up the whole situation. So then, when at the same time, across from this vendor, Vedic Win is talking to the children and trying to get their support, and trying to basically win over like the children, so that the children would want the parents, support, and all that. And she says that she would give a concession, that instead of talking about the prophets being in the wormhole, she asked Keiko to just not talk about the wormhole at all. And Keiko replies, well, what about when we get to evolution and science and other stuff like that? And she says, well, we'll cross that bridge, we'll get there. When we get there, we'll talk about it then. And Keiko says, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to continue to talk about it in the scientific way. And so then we get back to Chief O'Brien and how he's still looking for this tool, and he thinks that maybe it's not an accident that killed the ensign, then maybe there was something. There was a murder. A murder. Then Jake and Cisco talk for a minute, and Jake tells Cisco, have you ever heard the story of Galileo? And he realized that the Earth revolved the sun and not the other way around. And they, you know, tortured him for it or banned his books or whatever. And that was the church doing that. And Cisco, understands that. I mean, he already knows that. And they talk about how, Jake talks about how, that's wrong, and then why should people and I'm paraphrasing, why should people cling to their religious beliefs in the first place when we have science that can explain things? And this is the one aspect of the show that really elevates it for me. I'm not a religious person, but I have faith, I have beliefs. And, a lot of people these days, certain people that would, I don't know, shoot Charlie Kirk, for instance. That guy came from a Mormon family. So I don't know what he believed. I know, I have an idea. And I don't want to get too political, but a lot of times religion is frowned upon these days. Whereas in the past, maybe in the 60s or 50s or whatever, in the past, it wasn't frowned upon, that people embraced their religion. And, it's no secret that people do bad things in the name of religion. And that we're not just talking Islam. They do it, Christians would bomb abortion clinics when I was growing up. It doesn't happen much anymore. Jews, again, let's not get into what's going on over there, but, it's a big mess, and religion has done, or people have done a lot of things in the name of their religion. But also Christianity served as that's what got people to believe that slavery was wrong. And I think they used it on both sides. People justified slavery because of the Bible. In the Bible, people had slaves. But they also used it to say that slavery is wrong. And just from an economic standpoint, even if you took away the moral aspect, it's just wrong to not pay people for their labor. That's a libertarian stance. But anyway, Cisco tells Jake that the Bajorans during the occupation held on to their beliefs because many times it was the only way that they could get through it. And you find that through the Holocaust. You find that through many people after 9/11, a lot of people, use their belief. Even if you listen to Gary Neurotic, he's not really religious, but I think he's kind of spiritual. But getting through addiction and recovering has in AA, there's kind of a spiritual aspect to it. you believe in a higher power. Whatever that higher power may be, that's up to you to figure out or decide. Even if it's your own self-preservation, so to speak, that you believe in yourself and that you're going to get through this. So I thought that was an excellent conversation, and one that I think of often, especially times like now, during the pandemic, where the economy was in the tank. I went through two jobs. I lost two jobs during the pandemic. One job that I worked at for 3 years prior, and when they first started talking about 2 weeks to stop the spread, which we now know was complete utter bullshit. They didn't know what they were talking about. They didn't know what it would take to stop anything. They didn't know any of this stuff. They were just coming up with it on the fly. And that was in March of 2020. I had been in a job for 3 years, and I was one of the lower man on the totem pole. So they let me go. I mean, I was able to get unemployment. It wasn't like it was like I was laid off. But it's not like I was asked to come back when things opened back up. And then, if you recall, things opened back up during the summer, that following summer, and I was at a different job, which I was working for a while. And then that following winter, going into 2021, people were they were closing back down, and limiting hours that you could be open and stuff like that. And eventually, again, my employer at the time was like, look, I can't afford. There was like 3 or 4 of us. And he was like, and 2 of us, he was like, I can't afford to keep you here, but you can go on unemployment. And, and then after, when it sort of ended in 2021, towards the end, I had another job that ended up, when the vaccine came out, and I ended up basically, if I didn't get that vaccine, I wouldn't be working at that job. And I ended up getting it, but then leaving for other reasons. So that wasn't really pandemic related, but there was that aspect of you're not going to have a job if you don't get this vaccine. And knowing what we know now, they call the current administration fascists and Nazis and stuff. That was some pretty fascist, I'd call that pretty fascist type stuff there, where the military or people in the government couldn't. I know I'm going off on a huge tangent that has nothing to do with this episode, but I'm going to circle back around in just a minute. Of the government, people in government were in that same position where you're not going to have a job if you don't get this vaccine. And then they tell people at the same time, my body, my choice. But that only applies to women and being pregnant, I guess. And those people in the military, okay, they weren't forced to do it. They weren't forced at gunpoint, but if your job is on the line, you're going to do it. right? And the people that didn't were fired, and Trump brought them back, but, the damage was done. Anyway, I would imagine that a lot of people during that time used their faith, and at that time you couldn't go to church. But anyway, but Jimmy Kimmel getting taken off the air for 5 days is a First Amendment violation, but not allowing people going to church during the pandemic, we're not worried about that. That has nothing to do with freedom of speech or religion or anything. You're to be a good little soldier and do your job. Anyway, enough about that. But it's true. That's everything I said is true. Where was I? I had left off. Oh. So Cisco goes to talk to Vedic Varel, who's more popular than Vedic Wynn. And at this point in the show, the previous Kai had died. I forget her name. They mention her in this episode. He's a more likely candidate to become the Kai. And he's more sympathetic towards Cisco's views. So Cisco comes to see him, and he says Cisco wants him to go to the, I forget what they're called. They have their own little council of Vedics, and talk to them about the situation. And he says that he can't because some of them are afraid of Wynn. Some of them do whatever Wynn tells them. Some of them are on his side, and he doesn't want to compromise that. And Cisco, realizes, he's religious, but he's also a politician, So he's not going to help him out. So Cisco's basically shit out of luck. But he goes back to the station, and the Bajoran crew members, there's a lot less of them now. And he asked Kira what's going on, and he said that a bunch of them called out sick. Everybody got sick all at the same time. That's crazy. And Benjamin, the Bajorans, Cisco, we'll say Benjamin. Benjamin goes to Kira and kind of gets up in her face and is basically like, these people are here to do their jobs. I'm trying to run this station. You need to tell them to get better really quick. He's kind of a hard ass on her. So, that's what I was going to say. Bashir. So Bashir finds out that the dude was killed by a phaser fire. And he was killed before Wynn arrived. So, and he was killed on the roundabout. So the whoever has been doing this has been covering their tracks and kind of changing, misdirecting, and all this stuff. So they're doing a good job, and Chief even says as much. So when they go to search the roundabout, it's him and it's Chief O'Brien and his assistant and they're talking, and they're kind of sitting next to each other, and Chief asks, basically they have this conversation where, the Bajorans and Starfleet, the Bajoran crew members and Starfleet members, they don't really socialize together, They kind of keep to themselves. And she notes that Chief is different, he's kinder. So there's a little bit of a racial component there. And then Odo wants to talk to Quark, and he asks if Odo knows, if Quark knows anything about this murder, and he doesn't know anything. And Odo tells him to keep his ears open, and Quark says that that's the 7th rule of acquisition. And if you look up, you can look up all the rules of acquisition. And I tried to come up with one, because there's a book that you can get that where you can come up with your own. And the one that I came up with was greed is good, but it can be dangerous. Or, be careful what you... That's what I came up with, because I was trying to come up with my own version of a fan, fiction. And I was trying to come up with... Basically, the story would be... just a quick synopsis or a quick rundown, I guess. The story is there's a planet where there's a bunch of something that the what is it? Not Trillium. I already talked about that. What is the liquid metal in that they deal with on Deep Space Nine? Why am I blanking on that? And somebody, I can see people out in the chat, and somebody's probably yelling at me right now. It's not titanium or liquid. God, it's on the tip of my tongue, but it's been a long day and I'm tired and my brain is frozen right now. But there's a bunch of that they find, and there's some Ferengi, God, that go to seek it out, but it's in a dangerous environment where there's big sloth monster or whatever. I was trying to make a combination of a TOS episode where there's a monster of the week kind of thing, and a Next Generation or Deep Space Nine type episode. So they go there, they get trapped by these village people that are worshippers of this. I was trying to make that episode of TOS where it's always a primitive culture that's being controlled by a robot machine or something. But maybe there's actual monster, creatures there that they worship. And that's their sacred spot or something where this mine of whatever is there. And then they get trapped there, but right before whoever's left on the ship sends out a distress signal, which the hero ship picks up, and they go to rescue them, and then they get trapped, and then they have to find their way out of the situation. That would have been the pilot episode of the fan fiction that I was trying to come up with, and the reason and I was gonna title it "Greed is Good," and then there's like a moral lesson and blah blah blah, and that was the idea. So I wanted to come up with my own rule of acquisition. Anyway, so basically they realized that somebody wanted to steal a roundabout, and they can't figure out why. And at the same time, the school gets bombed, and they go and investigate it. Keiko, thankfully, is not, well, depending on how you as an audience feel, thankfully or not thankfully, Keiko wasn't at the school at the time. Nobody was there, so nobody's injured. But Odo realizes that it's all components that anybody can make. So it's a homemade bomb is what they're basically looking for. And Cisco, Vedic Wynn shows up, and she's like, to me, fakely worried about Keiko, and Cisco kind of gets mad, and she asks, are you basically blaming me for this situation, or holding me responsible for this situation, because she's stirring up shit, And then it goes, it kind of, this episode is relevant even today, and I'm going to talk about that when I get to the end. Holding her responsible, and he says the commander of this station is, so yeah, he's basically, you're stirring up shit, which is leading to somebody bombing this thing. Kind of like, again, we talk about the media stirring up shit, and then they're not directly responsible, but then when you constantly call somebody a Nazi and a fascist and all this stuff, and you don't report the news truthfully, and you put your own bias into it, eventually some nut job is going to go and do something like they did with Charlie Kirk. The media is not directly responsible, but they share in the blame, sort of like Vedic Wynn. And then of course they want to double down on it and try to flip it around on Jimmy Kimmel. It's a free speech thing when it wasn't, because Disney took him down, not the Trump administration. But anyway, moving on. So she asked, like I said, she fakes asking Chief about Keiko, and so then an incoming transmission comes in, and I just said that really weird, but and it's from Vedic Varel, and he wants to visit the station. So he's been on Bajor in this monastery, not really getting involved in like the politics of this of like the school thing and who's going to be the next Vedic, because it's not like they run for, it's not like running for office or whatever. I guess it's more akin to them when the Cardinals pick a new pope or something. And so then the assistant to Chief O'Brien shows up to where Wynn is like hanging out, and she says that they found out about the runabout, and that there's no escape plan, if she carries out this mission. So basically, it was her all. It was Agatha all along. No, it was Vedic Win all along. And so basically, she was behind this whole plot. And Chief. So Chief ends up finding these encrypted files, and asks Dax to help him with it, and to decrypt it. And the Vedic arrives, and everybody's like, they love him. You know, they like everybody loves him. So he wants to go to the school to show with Vedic Win, to show as a show of like solidarity, and you know that their condolences and stuff like that. You know, nobody's killed, but still, you know, it's a big deal. So Chief is chasing down like his leads, and gets to where we were in the beginning of the episode with the place, the section of the station that they were doing repairs, and he figures out, oh, it was her. Her name is, I forget, Neela. Her name's Neela, and that she had likely gotten into the weapons locker, and because she changed like the codes or something. So Cisco is at the school with the Vedics, and Chief tells Cisco to look out for Neela. So he's like scanning the audience, the crowd, and he sees her, and she pulls out a phaser, and he like knocks the people to the side and jumps after her, and she ends up shooting at Vedic Viril but misses, and then Cisco tackles her, and then and Odo drags her off, and then later on he's talking to Kira about the situation, and Kira says that she, you know, trusted Win. She goes up to Win afterwards and realizes that she knew that something like this bombing would bring him up to the station, and that would be the opportunity to assassinate him so that she could be the Kai. But they can't prove anything, and Neela says that she acted alone, and she's not budging on that. So Cisco and Kira talk, and Kira says that Cisco was right, and that, you know, she doesn't, because she wasn't so religious, you know, and during the occupation. And anyway, I initially gave it a 6 out of 10 because it is kind of a slow burn. But then when I think about it more, and I think about that conversation with Jake and the whole religious thing, and everything that I've discussed over the course, you know, the Charlie Kirk stuff, and how this is still relevant to today, 30 years later, because we're still dealing with issues of what can be taught in schools and how much influence the teachers are having on students, and what influence religion is having on schools. And, you know, it's different discussions. It's different depending on what you're talking about. I mean, back then, you know, there was a discussion of whether evolution should be taught in schools, you know, and that still comes up from time to time. But now it's more like the transgender stuff, and at what age should kids be exposed to those type of discussions, and then there's parental rights, and again, going back to the pandemic, people were getting arrested at school board meetings because they're bringing up things that they don't want to be known public, about the type of books that are in classrooms now, you know. And so, I mean, a lot of that stuff is still relevant. And I suppose in the future there'll be a different discussion that'll be relevant. So, and that's what makes for a good, not only a good Star Trek episode, but a good science fiction episode or movie, is that it's timeless, you know. So I would say maybe we can give it a little more of a bump, maybe a 6.5, maybe more than that. I don't know. I mean, if I had the ability, I'd probably just put out and there were, if I could, I'd probably just put out a poll. But I don't have that ability. So let's go out and see what people are saying. We have Gavin Blackburn saying hello, hello. And Gavin Blackburn says, as long as there's an excuse or scapegoat, people will try to get away with something. It's human nature, indeed. And there will always be stuff like that. Gavin Blackburn also says Star Trek episodes can lead to moral tangents. Yeah, indeed. Again, yeah, and that's what I love about it, is it allows us to have these discussions. Latinum. Latinum. Thank you, Gavin Blackburn. It was Latinum. Jesus Christ. Michelle Ferry says hello. Hello, Michelle Ferry. And says that Gavin Blackburn agreed Star Trek can lead to moral tangents. That's what we love about it. So yeah. So this episode, and I mentioned Thursday that I had recognized the title, but I didn't recognize like what was the plot of the episode. So I'm glad it gave me something more to talk about than just, oh, I liked it, or I didn't like it, and that's going to happen, as I've said before. If I have more to say, I'll say it. And I did have more to say because this episode reminded me of so many different things. And that's a good thing. It should. We should never forget, first of all, and second of all, Star Trek and science fiction in general should make you think, and it should, and hopefully give you somewhat, if you're a kid, somewhat of a moral compass, and that's what it did when I was growing up. I mean. So now let's get to the portion of the show where fate decides the next episode. And I completely just closed out that generator. Because we're gonna I'm gonna have to start from. So right now I completely closed out. So right now it's on TNG episode Evolution. We're gonna randomize it and see what we get. Well, either way, we're getting a TNG episode. We have TNG Season 2, Episode 7, Unnatural Selection. That's where they beam down to the planet, and the guy that plays Deep Throat on the X-Files is there. And they're like, and Pulaski, they have their cloned bodies or something. Oh, old Gavin Blackburn, old Trek, new Trek doesn't lead anywhere. It leads to, yeah, it does. It leads to Nerdrotic. It leads to Robert Meyer Burnett having rants on YouTube and Nerdrotic making fun of it, and me and my rants. Okay, so anyway, that's going to be it for me tonight. I'm tired, and I think we had a pretty good discussion about this episode. So I want to thank Gavin Blackburn for showing up, and Michelle Ferry for showing up, and anybody else that's lurking or anybody in the future. This has been the Red Hour. I'm the Dead Man, and I will be back tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat place, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I remembered what time zone I live in now. And I think last time when I was struggling with what time zone I live in, I said that I had always lived in the South, but that's not true. I lived in Maryland for 8 years. That was a significant portion of my life, so how I left that off, I don't know. But anyway, have a good night, and I'll see you.